Hello and welcome. Today I'm going to show you 10 tiny Tableau tips all about formatting. So let's jump in. So this first one's pretty simple. This is a pretty basic table that I'd say a lot of people have probably made in Tableau before. And one of the common gripes with this is there's no indicator, at least on the table, of what is in this column. So I've seen people do a number of fixes for this, but what I just like to do is do an inline or ad hoc calculation. Up here at the top where I type whatever I want it to be labeled, hit enter, and there it is. Obviously we're seeing this pop up, which is the label for this, and if we want to get rid of that, we just right click and show hide field labels for columns, and there. That column's labeled just like anything else. One tip down, 9 tips to go. This next one is also a tip on tables. I love talking about tables. I just did a session on it at TC. And this table is also pretty standard, but it looks kind of boring. So one thing I like to do to just spice it up a little is to just make all of the cells differentiated from each other. Now, one way that you can do this is if you were to go into formatting and go to borders, we could add in the borders on the table. And so this does differentiate all of the cells, but that's just not punchy enough for me. So what I like to do actually is go in and add a bar chart. So we're doing another inline calc. We're going to change the mark type here to bar. And then there we go. I like this a little bit better. I think it's easier to tell sort of where the cells are. I think it looks a little bit cleaner and more fun. So this is just a modern take on a way to do a table. On to tip number 3. Now this one is going to be about labeling bar charts. So in this example, I have the bar chart labels in the ends of the bar and the font is white. However, we see here that there are a couple labels that we aren't able to look at fully because the label is actually longer than the bar is. So we're just getting the last couple pieces and it's being cut off. And even if we were able to see the white part of the text, if it were a different color, it would still sort of spill over the bar, and I just don't think that's a very clean look. So we have a pretty easy way to fix this. So we're going to go in this one, and this is going to be the one that we're going to tidy up. The way that I actually have this is there's a bar chart and a Gantt chart. This is the way to get the labels in the ends of the bar. I learned this from an InfoLab blog, which I will link below. But what we're going to do is we're actually going to label these both separately. So I already made the calculation, but basically what we're going to do is we are going to look at how big the bars are in relevance to the largest value in the entire view. So I'm just using 9. You're probably gonna have to play with this based on how much real estate this sheet is taking up in your overall dashboard. But I found that 9 works just for the example. So I'm saying if the sum of sales is greater than 1/9 of the largest bar in the view, then show the sum of sales. And then I have another one that is just the opposite. So what we are going to do is we are going to take on the Gantt chart and we're going to replace it with this one. And so now we see the ones where there was that overhang, it went away because those ones aren't bigger than 1/9 of the biggest bar in the view. And so we're going to go on the bar chart now and take the other one and put those labels there. We're going to align them to the right. I'm going to change the font to match the mark color. And then now if we go back, now it's a lot easier to see. So where there is room, we're seeing the labels inside the bar. Where there isn't, it's coming outside of the bar. So this was the before, this was the after. That was tip number 3. For tip number 4, we're going to utilize number formatting. So we have this nice bar chart showing the sum of sales by month for the current year that we're looking at. But also in the tooltip, I have the percent change versus the prior month. So it was down in October 5% versus September, up 37% versus August, and so on. And this works except for when we get to January, where It says month over month because that's what we have in the tooltip, but there's no actual value there because there's no previous month to compare it to. So we're going to fix that. The way that I have it right now is the way a lot of people would do it, which is they would have their sum of sales, they would have the percent difference, and they would have month over month, so people knew what that number was in reference to, and then the sort of formatting with the parentheses on the outside. And that's great for every time that there is a value, but in this case, it creates sort of an unsavory look when it's not there. So what I recommend doing instead is, rather than put this information in the tooltip, we are actually going to go to the formatting and change it here. So I already have the formatting where it has the triangles for up or down, but we're just going to add month over month and the parentheses here. Same thing for this as well. And then also for even, where that's the case. Cool, and now we see, shows up the exact same way as it did before in every bar except for January, where it's not relevant, and so now it's not there at all. So if we jump back to our before and after, here's what January looked like before, and here's what January looked like after. It's great in situations like this, but it can also be helpful if you just want something consistent to appear with a number every single time you have it. So another example that I've used is if we had, let's say, order ID, and then we brought in quantity on text. It says 3. I might not know 3 what, my users might not know 3 of what, so I might go into default properties, number format, and I put 0 products because that's what it's quantifying, is the number of products, and I hit OK. And now everywhere where we bring this in, it's going to have products there. If I were to do sum of quantity by order date, and we'll just do it by month. Now even in the tooltip, it's telling me products every single time because it's in the default formatting. So that's tip number 4. On to the next one. So we are going to format these KPIs, and it's actually going to give us our next 5 tips. So let's get started. First, let's jump into this sheet. What I want to do is format this value down here. In addition to the fact that we don't have what this percent is versus, I also like to include some arrows. So we want the formatting to be similar to what we have in the caption here. However, if we actually look at what's on our text mark, we see that there are 3 different values here. We have one for if it's even, one for if it's negative, and one for if it's positive. So they can all be formatted differently. So all 3 of those fields would need the number formatting changed. Something that people don't often realize is that you can actually do the default number formatting on multiple fields at the same time. So if I click the one for even, press shift and click down to positive, I'm selecting all of them. When I go to default properties, number format, I can paste our intended format here. And there we go. So now we see that it's formatted here, but this is just the one for negative. But if we go into positive, we can see that it is there as well, and also for even. So if we wanted to, for example, also format profit and sales and have the default properties for those be currency, we can do that too. So this is great if you want to set the default number formatting for a number of fields to be the same thing at the same time. Tip number 5 is done. Next is something that I used to even designate the difference between the even, the negative, and the positive, and that is the sign function. So it's really simple. It's just sign, and what this does is look at whether or not a value is positive, negative, or even. If it's positive, it will return an integer of 1. If it's negative, it will return an integer of -1. And if it's even, it will return an integer of 0. Why is this helpful? Well, when we do these comparisons, so here I'm doing the max month of sales versus the prior year, rather than say, oh, if If that is greater than 0, then give me this, or if it's less than 0, give me this. It does it very simply, so it's a lot quicker way to use it. So that is tip number 6. Next tip is around this fun little line on the side here. I actually believe I learned this trick from Will Perkins, so credit to Will, but we see we have it on this one and not this one. So let's go and add it here. What this actually is a reference line. So we're going to add a reference line to the table. We can see that it's coming up here. It's a little close. We're going to choose constant, and I think that we're going to take off the label and the tooltip, and I think that that is a good spot. I think I might have had it maybe even at 0.02 on the other one, but we can always change it. So let's go see. Yeah, it's a little too far over. So we're just going to go right click here. We're going to edit it, play around with it. 0.01. Great, looking better. So that's how you get that fun little line fairly easily. The next tip is about our fun friend min 0. So people use min 0 to create more structure and control around the way their sheets look. So here you'll see that I'm using min 0.05 because that was what put the KPI for me in the exact place that I wanted it. People will use average 0.0 or different versions of this, but they all, for the most part, yield the same result. One thing I want to talk about here is, though, how do we get it to that perfect spot for us? Well, there's a couple ways that we can do this. A lot of people will often, what they'll do is they'll play with the axis. So they'll go in here, they'll add a little bit this way, shift it over, maybe they'll do it to 1.5. We'll see where it moves that. But what I actually like to do sometimes, if I know it's going to take a decent amount of adjustment, is I will take this, I'll just save it as KPI placement, and bringing up the axis just one more time, you'll see this little pin down here says that it's fixed. So this tells me that I have an already provided fixed beginning and end to my axis, so it's going to stay that way. And then what I like to do is I will go to the dashboard, because sometimes things render differently here based on the size that they are versus the size that they were on the sheet. We're going to go to edit calculated field, and we're going to select KPI placement. That's the one that we have. And I'm actually going to change this value now. So this value is telling us where on the axis it is. And so maybe I want to shift it over. Maybe I want it to be at 0.3 instead. And I'll just click apply and watch that move. I actually want it to move back a little, so let's try 0.2. I find that this just tends to be a quicker way to make those adjustments and be able to see them, as opposed to if let's see, if we go back and we were to add in the axis again and do it here, I can't see it because there's not enough room. Making the adjustments here wouldn't actually tell me anything. But also I like having it in the calculated field, because then it's reusable, and I know I can just set my axis to the same thing every single time. But also it makes it so it's happening across sheets where it's being used. So it was actually on both of these sheets. So if I were to pull that up just one more time, I go up to analysis, go into the KPI placement. Since it's on both of those sheets, when I'm making those changes, it's moving both of them. So I wouldn't be able to edit the axis range on both of those at the same time, but I can edit this calc on both of those at the same time. So I'm allowed to make those adjustments across sheets all at once. Now, tip number 9 is actually my favorite tip out of all 10. This is something that I see people do fairly frequently, and I think there's a more efficient way to do it. So let's go back into this KPI card. We had already shown that For the percent change versus the prior year, we actually have three values here. We have one for if it's positive, one for it's negative, and one for if it's even. That way we could format them differently. So we want that color to represent sort of the direction that that is. But this requires us making three separate calculated fields. So we have one for each of those saying, hey, is it positive? If it's negative, return it. And then we have all three of them here. We have to format them separately. But there's actually a quicker way to do this in my opinion, and so we're going to do that on this sheet. So what I also have is sort of the same min 0.0 trick, but going up and down. So this is just giving me a marks card for this top portion of the KPI where it's telling me the month and the total, and then another marks card for this bottom portion of the KPI where it's just telling me what that percent change is versus the prior year. So if we expand this out a little bit, we'll see we have those three values as before. If we open up the label, again, we'll see them formatted. So all I did was split them up. But instead of this, I'm going to take all of these off. And I'm going to add just the regular max month of sales versus the prior year onto label. We see the similar formatting. I'm just going to bump this up to 11 and make it bold so it looks a little bit closer to the other one, but we see that it's just black now because if we go into the text mark, that's the color it is here. But what we want it to do is change colors similar to the other one depending on the direction. So what we're going to actually do here is take sign and place it on color. What happened? Absolutely nothing. Why did nothing happen? We can see up here that that sign has this bright pink color for being down, but why aren't we seeing that here? Well, that's because we actually have a transparent shape. These are both transparent shapes. And so when you color a transparent shape, nothing happens, which is exactly what we want. But one thing that is in Tableau and underutilized is if we go to font, we can actually choose match mark color for the font color. And now, though the shape is transparent and we aren't seeing the color come through, that shape is still that color. And so it's giving that color to the text. So now instead of having those three different fields all on text, we just have the one field. So now that we look at them side by side, we're getting the exact same result, but we have less fields. So less calculated fields in our data pane, less formatting that we have to do. If we need to make updates down the road, there's less places that we need to change it. And all we had to do was add that second min 0.0 on rows. So that is probably my favorite tip, but I have one more to go, which is adding consistent coloring. Now, I developed this trick at some point during consulting when I either got requests from stakeholders to change one of the colors that was consistently through the workbook, or when I was replacing data sources and all of the colors fell out. If I had sort of this model where I had one color that was on multiple sheets, often people would just pick that color if we weren't using a field or a calculation to differentiate what the color would be. What I actually started doing though was making a field that's just color, and if we go to what this calculation looks like, it just has true in here and nothing else, but adding that to this sheet, which you saw before as well, made it so if I needed to update the color, oops, if I needed to update the color, it was very easy to do. So since I had that field across all of my sheets, if I wanted to change it to this purple instead, it would change everywhere at once. It's a really simple trick, but it's just something that's often overlooked, and it has saved me a bunch, like I said, in those previous examples, but also just when I've changed my mind and wanted to try something new. Well, that's it. Those are all 10 of my tips. I hope you found something helpful, something that you'll be able to utilize in your next dashboard, and I will see you in the next one. Except I didn't copy it, so. And then I will go to, where will I go? Is that an analysis? I can never, oh, edit calculated field. Wonderful. So next is something that I use to actually oops.